who's thank you. I'll just repeat slowly for the people who are joining. Please keep your mics off, but feel free to turn on your camera if you're comfortable with the webinar being recorded. So Trust Consultancy, we're an independent third-party monitoring and evaluation agency. We're based in Turkey and Gaziantep and have satellite offices in Pakistan and Palestine. We have been founded by Syrian humanitarians in 2016, one of whom, Youssef Almustafa, is our CEO and will be joining today. We have worked with many partners across the globe in very different contexts, and we have conducted over 180 third-party monitoring assignments. I think we're now past the 200. We work with very different data, quantitative and qualitative. We've conducted thousands of surveys, observations, key informant interviews, in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and we also conducted over 100 internal trainings for our staff. And we organize moments like this, so public discussions and public webinars where we can address and have conversations that are relevant for the broader humanitarian and development sector. Today, we are very, very excited for the speakers and the topics. As many of you, I'm sure, know, we're going to be talking about how we can make third-party monitoring more local and authentic, and what kind of strategies and bigger reflections go into this process. The main speaker for today will be Richard Harrison. Thank you for making it. Richard has worked on as a MEL advisor for the UN and for the UK government. He has worked in MEL across the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, so very different local contexts and very different kind of specific issues. He has designed third-party monitoring initiatives for the UK government, in effort with the UNDP and UN peacekeepers, and he is the author of the EU guidelines on best practices in third-party monitoring, specifically in conflict areas. Volker, who will be sharing his specific perspective, working as an effectiveness, knowledge, and learning specialist at the Danish Refugee Council, so the DRC. He is based in the headquarters, and he is global responsible for several cross-cutting themes, including monitoring and evaluation, accountability, and learning. He has over 2 decades of experience in the field, so it will be great to hear some insights, especially because he is interested in shifting the process of monitoring to one that can actually center affected populations and community in the decision-making process that will affect them. We also have Youssef Almustafa. As I said, he's the CEO of Trust Consultancy, and has also decades of experience in the humanitarian field, and he will be bringing in a perspective which is more from the point of view of third-party monitoring agencies. I will be facilitating today. I'm Eleonora Gandini, and I'm the Business Development Officer here at Trust. Welcome to everyone, those who are joining, and I think we can get started with the interesting discussion. I will stop sharing my screen, and Richard, you can go ahead and share yours. Thank you.
Great. Hopefully you can see my screen and me, and I want to say thanks very much indeed to Trust for organising this. I think it's a very important topic, and I'm very happy to have the chance to speak on it. It's also great to be talking to all of you. We now have 50+ people. I love this industry. You know, obviously it's a key part of humanitarian industry. It's great. Thank you for all you do. Like we're in a cornerstone of this humanitarian space. So well done, everyone. I know it's a hard job, but it's great to have some contact with you. So yeah, I guess replaying the title of the event, you know, I think we all have a role to play. I hope that we can discuss a little bit today what we as individuals, and I guess there's people from implementer side, TPM side, and maybe some donors here, But we all can play a role, and I think there are some ideas I'd like to share. Probably some of them or most of them are wrong, but let's get a discussion going. But here's the starting point. What can we all do to make third-party monitoring more local and authentic? So I think just a couple of quick clarifying slides or points. Just on the name of the event, you know, I kind of think local and authentic are kind of overlap and are kind of similar. So there's so many ideas here that I've not taken huge effort to separate local and authentic. I'm glad we named the event in that way, but I'm not going to separate those two things too much. Similarly, I think third-party monitoring and meal obviously overlap a lot. But in this case, I have tried to really think about third-party monitoring per se. I think if we had an event about meal more generally, it could look quite different actually. But so there's my starting point. So where to begin? For me, my sort of personal journey thinking about this issue of localization began when I was lucky enough to write this report for the EU on the topic. The topic was not about localization, it was about just best practices in third-party monitoring. They wanted to understand how to do it better, but funnily enough, localization would come up. The report has, what I'm going to show you is a small part of the report, and I'm not going to talk about the rest, but it was based on 41 interviews with people who are involved in the space. So donors, third-party monitoring people, and implementers. And basically, I asked everyone to be really honest and candid about how they see the third-party monitoring world and how we can all work together better. But one of the things that surprised me that came out of the research was already somehow about localization. And it was about the structural side of the industry. And what happened was that I ended up drawing in this report two diagrams, which I now would call the northern model and the southern model, although in the report I think I called them emerging. The idea is quite simple. I think traditional third-party monitoring has developed in such a way that you often have like the donor working with a northern lead agency, and underneath them you may have a local data collector, a local agency who would be subordinate to the northern agency, maybe in London or Brussels or DC, and then of course they're acting with implementing partners. And I don't need to criticize that model, and it's obviously one that has common sense behind it in terms of donors want to be near the people that they rely on. But of course, there's you know, if you think about the grand bargain and humanitarian discussion about localization, we have to think about how much power we're putting into report writing, etc., and how close to the ground people are. So the idea that others had, donors and third-party monitoring people and implementers had, was they felt like emerging was a southern model whereby you would see the local data collector work directly with donors, possibly stealing some experts from lead agencies in a more localized model. Of course, there are risks, but you know, there is a lot to discuss about this. And it's not the point of my presentation today, but it was my first chance to think about the idea of third-party monitoring and the idea of localization. But anyway, like I said, I think I realized when Trust asked me to speak at an event of theirs, I was going to speak about that report, but then I realized when I tried to think about these issues of third-party monitoring localization, I realized that actually that's a tiny issue. So what I tried to do on the next slide, and it's quite a busy slide, is to unpack my other thoughts about third-party monitoring and localization. I start, actually, there's two slides, sorry. The first slide is who are the actors and what are they going through? So I'm lucky enough to have been a donor, to be an implementer, and be a third-party monitor. So I'm going to speak candidly first about what I think is in their minds. I hope not to offend anybody, but I think everyone's, we're talking about lots of good people, trying hard, working hard, but the drivers and incentives, I think, are worth touching on. So I'm going to look at donors, implementers, and third-party monitoring teams separately. From the donor perspective, you probably know this, or you may suspect some of it, but my recollection of working on the donor side is that people want successful programming. These are good people. It's not bureaucracy for them. They want, though, insurance against criticism. They're humans. They feel busy, very busy, busier than you may think. And they feel that mail is just too hard to master. For 70% of donors, mail is a nightmare. They fear being disconnected from ground reality, and they know that you know more than them if you're an implementer. Implementers, I perceive, I'm sorry if I speak out of turn, but this is just my perception. Many implementers feel I want a fair trial from a third-party monitor. They also feel that they know more about this context than a third-party monitor would, and I think that's normal and natural because third-party monitoring contracts are limited. They feel that third-party monitors sometimes seem to be out to get them, and it's sometimes true, I think. And they fear the wasted effort of duplication, especially when it comes to outcome measurement, because third-party monitors often measure the same outcome stuff that donors are so focused on. From the third-party monitoring teams, I feel that they want to help both sides genuinely. But we must also be honest that on the commercial side, if it's a private sector third-party monitoring, they must seek more contracts and more profit, and that obviously has to incentivize to some extent the nature of the work. They feel, though I'm not sure they would say this, but they often feel that because their contracts are limited, because they cannot be given the resource to understand the context, it's very rare for a donor to be kind enough to offer a contract with hundreds of days of context analysis work, although some governments are doing that more. They're in a very difficult position. And so that's hard for them. And they fear, I think they fear, or I used to fear, and my colleagues used to fear, arriving at judgments with such small sample size. It's a tough job. So having outlined my perceptions of the inner workings of the actors, my last slide, but it's quite a long one, is to talk about ideas that occurred to me. Some of these are going to be wrong. Maybe I haven't thought them through enough, but let's try. I want to separate it into three levels: donors, implementers, and third-party monitoring teams. And I want to go from left to right from the sort of phases of third-party monitoring. So before third-party monitoring on the left is program design. By this, I mean all the things that are happening in government before the third-party monitoring in terms of reference are even written. And then during third-party monitoring, design and implementation, and then the last column is sort of forward-looking or general stuff. So program design. Programs don't come from nowhere. Lots of people are talking a lot, senior people. And my first point is about something that I think donors and implementers can collaborate on. What you may not know, if you haven't worked inside government, is that when donors, and when I've worked for the UN, or I still do, are designing programs, they feel vulnerable. They're often feeding off old evidence or anecdotal evidence. It's a senior discussions, brainstorming, lacking funds for fresh evidence. There's no budget. If the program hasn't been born, it doesn't have a budget and it can't do research, really. So they feel extremely vulnerable, they need help. So the idea is that somehow implementers, because you have all that access, I don't know what the specific idea is, but if when I was with FCDO, I could have spoken to an NGO to have a chance to quietly test some thoughts with community level, it would have given massive reassurance. And I may have finished my documents sooner, got my terms of reference out sooner, etc. So there's something in there. The next one, third-party monitoring teams. I think you can help too. My perception is that third-party monitoring initiatives have become hundreds of buckets of beautiful knowledge, and governments don't look at them for learning. I've been using AI a lot recently, letting it absorb documents, lots of documents, and see what it does, and it's astonishing. And I just think there's something to be said about technology and what happens to all the third-party monitoring data. You could say MEL data as well, but I think third-party monitors could demand to get paid to harvest your own information. In terms of third-party monitoring design, I mean, the Southern model, what I call it, like we spoke about a minute ago. So, you know, actually, I think I have heard that some governments are doing this well, but my ask to donors would be to adapt procurement to make it easier for Southern contractors. Of course, there are good reasons for due diligence checks, and there are reasons why it's natural that Northern firms will get the contract. But it's also true that local firms end up with a small fraction of these contracts. And I think there's something to be said about that. The next thing I'd like to talk about design is my most controversial suggestion. It's about outcomes, about outcome measurement. Maybe this is a silly suggestion, but I wonder if INGOs get tired of being questioned about outcomes. Donors are certainly fixed on outcomes. You know, I think if you really ask a donor what percentage of their interest is on outcomes versus outputs, it's unfortunately, it's like 80% outcomes. So I remember setting up the TPM system with a part of the UN when I was with FCDO, and the head of the UN department turned around to me and said, "What are you doing setting up a system where you monitor our outcomes and we, the UN, monitor our outcomes? Should we both be doing this?" And I just wonder whether there's something in that, and whether in order to be localized, should we think about how we give power to data? And if we leave two sets of data floating around donors' corridors, the implementer outcome data and the TPM outcome data, okay, maybe the TPM outcome data will win, but finally, we're spending money and we're making less clear what the outcome is. And I just wonder whether in the future, in order to boost local voices, we stop making it so complicated. And occasionally on some projects, just say, "Halas, we the implementers will do outputs, you do outcomes, good luck." Maybe it's too controversial. Then in terms of third-party monitoring design and between implementers and third-party monitoring teams, there's this tension, a natural tension between you, and there's like an invisible or unwritten rule that we can't cross the line of interacting. And maybe that's a real rule, I don't know. But I feel like in some years from now, we may have an industry where third-party monitoring teams and implementers, especially at least once or twice at the beginning of the program or something, when the contract is awarded, try and meet and understand each other. Away days, it's okay to be friendly. Like maybe after a time it changes, but at a human level, I think we can connect better. Also, in terms of the local view, something I feel really passionate about is because implementers have more of an understanding of the local view, I really think donors should have a rule where they always give first sight of a third-party monitoring report to the implementing partner. because, and they do not, and they insist on not receiving it first, because the local understanding of the partner is greater because they're implementing. And it's almost impossible for third-party monitoring teams to know 10% of what implementers know. So, you know, I think this is an important principle that leads to locality. In terms of implementation, this is a strange thought, but you're all familiar with log frames, results frameworks. In those documents, the crucial column is targets, right? It's hard to choose the indicators. It's hard to choose the means of verification. It's really hard to choose the targets because you're putting a finger in the air often. No one's developed a database of normative targets to lean on that I know about. How come those targets seem not to be set by communities often? So I feel like in terms of localization, from a very different perspective, I want to see a future in which community members, if the indicator is percentage that feel safe or are no longer hungry, I'm not aware of those targets being set by communities very often. Maybe I'm wrong. There are two things in implementation that I feel implementers can do. One is to get more creative, visceral, and real by producing video and audio outputs, and also doing longitudinal panels, so long-term, in-depth, qualitative understanding of humans and beneficiaries. And I feel like at the moment, many donors, at least at the middle management level, see meal or TPM as kind of an expense, an avoidable expense. And I think that they're time poor. And if we can get more visceral and immediate, we can reduce some of the drivers, some of the frustration around meal. So I urge you to think about that. There's also some tech opportunities that I think are really interesting. Premise is a company with a huge global database, of people in tough countries that you can access. Geopol, you may know, does text-based research. And Sela is a new app funded by the Canadian government that uses AI and the blockchain to validate that locals approve or endorse that aid has been distributed. Finally, under implementation, I kind of want third-party monitoring people to embrace AI and to seek donor blessing to do so, or let it be known they're doing it, because when you're in the TPM hot seat and you have to understand, you know, a governor in Northeast Syria as if you lived there, you need to read a lot of stuff. And I know that AI has its weaknesses, but AI, I think, is doing, and that's why it's such a big deal, can crunch a lot of data really quickly. So it's not easy to be a third-party monitor. It's really hard, actually. And I think AI maybe can help. For the future, donors, in terms of understanding local reality, we never measure outcomes and impact 3-4 years later, because the thing is finished. Everyone's gone home. Why do donors never invest in whole of society impact, meta outcome harvesting? Like I think that would be cool, and understand true impact in local communities better. To implementers for the future, I guess I don't know if this is naive, but I feel like you have data, let's say satisfaction from surveys, that shows which projects, community, local reaction is better. So I guess I'm being a bit cheeky here, but I'm daring you to compare. Somewhere in your databases, you know that this project, beneficiaries are 94% satisfied, and this project it's 72%. I know that's really sensitive and challenging, and even if you only do it internally, I think we're still operating in silos. And if we shine a light on normative data, we might find that when a community is talking to us and we can believe that the impression on us should be more powerful by comparing, let's be open for that. And the final option for third-party monitoring teams, I want to say that I think, you know, sexual and abuse and corruption are things that I don't feel very comfortable implementers and third-party monitoring people reporting on by themselves. There are like, there's at least one thing out there called Loop, Talk to Loop, which is an independent, objective space where communities can report sexual abuse and corruption. And I feel like it's more credible to think of community using a service like that to bring real credibility to that sort of data. So that's it. Thank you. I think back to Eleanor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This was super interesting and already so many thoughts, I'm sure. Maybe we can start with Volker, if you have anything you would like to share from your side.
Thank you. This is a super interesting topic, and of course, as an implementer, we're an implementer, right? And we are often, while we do, of course, also work ourselves with third-party monitoring mechanisms, and that is often a way of overcoming access barriers, of course, which is also another reason why we use third-party monitoring. We are also at the receiving end, as Richard kindly pointed out, of donor-driven third-party monitoring. And there is indeed, and I think that came out really well in Richard's presentation, there is indeed a little bit of a disconnect, right? Where we feel we do, of course, endeavor and want to really understand the change that we're contributing to, and what role will DRC as an implementing agency plays in that change. That's important, not only because we need to tell the donors, but it's also important because this gives us a sense of being effective, right? So why are we here in the first place? And then the same time, when we have this donor-driven third-party monitoring missions, they're not necessarily particularly integrated in that kind of thinking, because they are an additional accountability layer that is donor-driven and therefore often directive. When the donor says we're going to send, there's going to be a third-party monitoring mission, and just make sure you get them all the stuff they need and facilitate. And that, of course, is quite a lot owing in terms of responsibility to those donor offices, right? It's a little bit of an attitude, it's a culture problem. It's often the case that they feel they have to have oversight rather than really wanting to understand the change, right? And to me, I always like to think about, compare that a little bit to something that I've also sometimes talk about, is the need to quantify everything, right? We like to quantify everything because at the end of the day, the majority of the donor money still comes from parliaments in rich countries, and they have a budget committee and they need to understand how much are they getting for their money. That is the sad reality. And that really drives that quantification and that like the oversight kind of mentality that we see still from donors along. So we need to bridge that gap. And that, of course, is a big gap to bridge, because as an implementing organization that is relying on donor money, we are in a power relationship in this case where we feel, of course, less empowered towards the donor. So that's one thing. But then I wanted to also say a little bit about the being more creative, visceral, and real. And yes, technology can help, but I also feel, and that's where I think local third-party monitoring, or let's say local monitoring organizations and local monitoring firms, can really play a very powerful part, because with connections to communities on the ground, so the more decentralized, the more localized, the better. What we could really do with is more systematically capturing the real feedback. So not the complaints we're getting through our community feedback mechanisms or the concerns, but let people express whether this is working for them, what it is doing for them. Is this actually the right thing to do? Can they even actually have a say in what is happening when an international NGO opens up offices and starts working, right? And we haven't quite figured out how to systematically capture that kind of feedback, but at the same time, it's the most powerful. And I remember, Richard, there was a time when you talked about a TripAdvisor for aid, right? And of course, that's a very modern software-based solution. But what we really need to create is that safe space in communities where they can say freely, hey, this is not working for me. But I want to be able to say that without feeling that then next month I'm not going to get anything, right? And I think that is where a locally based organization, company could really play a very powerful role. And we need to use that a little bit to bridge that culture gap between the donors, the compliance side. We just want to have oversight, and us, we need to comply and we need to provide that, but we also really want to understand how best we can generate change and contribute to change. I think I will leave it at that for now. Some food for thought, and over to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe to integrate on the TPM perspective, I can pass the word to Youssef if you'd like to share.
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, I will talk maybe or reflect about our experience as a third-party monitoring company, local one based in Turkey. In fact, when we talk about localization and third-party monitoring, we have two aspects. The first one, role of third-party monitoring in localization itself. Given that we have two other parties, as a third-party monitoring company, we can enhance and progress localization through transferring our knowledge experience from different assignments and different contexts. And another one, which is the focus of today, how we can localize third-party monitoring itself. First, I would like to say maybe there's a trend these days that local actors, companies or evaluators, they have more roles than before compared to as individuals or as companies as well. There are many reasons behind this. First, there are some donors, there are some international actors, they are pushing towards localizations, and sometimes they are clear about this as one of the criterion when they assess proposals, which is really good. Another very important reason, efficiency, because usually local evaluators, local companies, usually they are more efficient in terms of cost. When it comes to travel, accommodation, fees, etc., it is much more efficient. So this is why third-party monitoring international companies, they found themselves forced to include or to increase role of third-party monitoring companies or monitors as individuals as well in this. And this is very clear recently. As a company, we receive emails from different third-party monitoring companies. Some of them, they are very big. Some of them, they are not that big, but they are still international and they need. But as a third-party monitoring companies, what difficulties we face usually, if we would like to talk about the second model of Richard, presented by Richard, usually conditions, eligibility criteria, sometimes extremely difficult to meet. Maybe sometimes it's impossible to meet, not only just now, but maybe in the future, because they include really very difficult in terms of financial aspect, in terms of turnover, in terms of previous assignments, etc. So this is very difficult. In addition, there are sometimes also some standards or quality standards we can say not easy to meet by local third-party monitoring companies. And here maybe a question, it would be great if Richard later on answers this question. He already presented two modalities. The first one, northern, and the second one, southern, and he suggests that we move from the first one to the second one. And here, there's something, we call it partnership these days between international companies and third-party monitoring companies. It is much more, I mean, familiar or now by different actors, donors or implementing actors or third-party monitoring companies. And we see that there's a power, I mean, shifting from international third-party monitoring companies to local third-party monitoring companies. This is slow, yet very slow. It is not fair so far, but there's a shift very slow. My question here maybe to Richard later on to answer, can we talk about a third model where we see both international actors and local actors as companies, not as like expert to, as you said, borrow an expert from here or there to work with each other, and we can consider this as a transitional period, and the objective later on or the purpose, maybe we have more power at the local level. So these are the most important points from my side. It will be great also, Volker, given that you are an international organization. So here we talk about donors and we talk about third-party monitoring companies and implementing partners. There are many organizations, we can say they are representatives of donors. We have UN agencies, we have international organizations. Sometimes they are in two positions. Sometimes they commission third-party monitoring companies if it is international or local, or sometimes they are monitored by other companies when they are commissioned by. It would be great if you share with us from your experience, what differences did you find at the DRC level, for instance, when you have third-party monitoring companies commissioned by donors, or would you commission yourself as an international organization? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Then maybe we can open it up to the public in the meantime if you want to think about questions and put them in the chat. But in the meantime, Richard, would you like to address the first question raised by Youssef?
Yeah, sure thing. So it's about a third model of partnership. Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, it's kind of implied or was already happening or tried to happen within the Northern model. I think my take on the whole subject is that it comes down to profit share, and the authenticity of the commercial arrangement. So when a Northern and Southern third-party monitoring company get together, often what's happening is data collection in the local agency and management and or report writing in the place in the donor country. And I've seen them work well and work badly. Where I think what you're talking about, or a successful, more harmonious or consistently harmonious future, is about the slightly ugly or niche issue of profit share. Paying a local third-party monitor or forcing the local third-party monitor, which sometimes happens, although generally I think Northern implementers are conscientious, even if inadvertently, agreeing a financial arrangement which puts the local implementer at risk. Costs can escalate really quickly. If the conflict increases, then the transportation costs increase. A profit share arrangement is often tried and is very successful. And it completely, for me, it completely changes the culture of the total team. Offer me a profit share as a local implementer, and I believe you're treating me as an equal partner. So I know a couple of European third-party monitoring companies who always profit share, and I think they have really healthy. So I mean, at the end of the year, the total profit is calculated by an auditor, and the profit is divided up into a percentage agreed, and I just find that very healthy.
Great, thank you. Volker, would you like to answer the second question?
Yes, very happy to. So first of all, I have to admit that I'm not totally on top of exactly how we work, what kind of organizations and companies we work with on the ground on third-party monitoring, but I can cover it in some broad strokes. And I'm also very happy to comment more on what we see from donors coming in. I know a bit more of that. So from our side, like I said earlier, when we use third-party monitors, we use them normally as our extension of our eyes and ears, right? We have no particular need for impartiality because we believe we run a separate meal function in the so monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning within the organization. And per definition in our structure, meal staff have an impartial role to play. And when they monitor, they also therefore do a quality check and also collect certain types of results that are specifically in their remit from the programs which are implemented by other people, right? So colleagues, but distinct from the meal colleagues. So we then would use third-party monitoring to be able to reach more difficult areas. For example, it could be that for various reasons, it's very difficult and challenging for DRC staff to travel to certain project locations, but at the same time, we may have quite significant work that we're supporting of a community-based organization, but we still want to, from time to time, also see how progress is, etc. So that's when that comes in as a very good mechanism, because then we would work with a group of people that are, for example, Somalia is a good example, quite used to operating in a particular social context, right? And not necessarily be seen as someone who comes in from the outside, and therefore have a lot more trust and ability to also do this kind of work. So then we would look for those characteristics, right? That we have someone who is as close as possible to the communities that we work with. What we see from the donors is very different. And I mean, I think the worst example is that I have seen in recent years is that we see increasingly also those big audit firms coming into third-party monitoring, where we then really get this, a little bit negative subcontracting chain where we say we have Deloitte contracted to then contract a group of monitors. And the actual people doing the monitoring may often be from a local outfit, organization, group, who have a strong ethos and a good professional stance, etc. But it is then what comes down from this perspective of audit firms, right? Because they say, this is what we want you to do, this is what you must do. And we actually have gotten in recent years into issues of data sharing in that field. We have, for example, in one instance, without going into detail, but in one instance, with one of these accounting firms being the overall contractor for that third-party monitoring mission on behalf of a donor, had quite insistent requests for what we felt unreasonable level of data sharing, right? Where we felt that was not safe, that was not correct. We want to safeguard data of vulnerable people who we work with. And at the same time, we were being pushed from this really corporate approach to share this data. So there is that challenge for us, and that I think it has a lot to do with like who is the main contract provider and who pushes that culture down. And that worries me a little bit, because it's easy for a big donor to say, we want to work with a big firm, a global contract, and you sort it out. But that culture travels down, right? And that's not fair on anyone, especially then those people on the ground who have to interact, and they both have to represent a respective position. And like in another life, they would probably get on quite well and cooperate, right? So that's the challenge that I see. Thank you.
Thank you so much. maybe I can collect the two questions that were raised in the chat, and I would direct one to Richard. I think you're best suited to answer this one, but if anyone else wants to jump in, you can also collectively answer. It was asked, how can we address data fatigue in communities while ensuring that TPM localization processes not only empowers them, but also manages the additional responsibilities placed on their shoulders effectively? So I think this refers to Richard's model in which you presented that communities would be kind of empowered to have these safe spaces where they also have more power to influence policy design, but this also maybe entails labor from the part of the communities, which can result in data fatigue. If you have any comments.
Okay, yeah, sure. I think I'm a little bit tired. I'm not understanding the question completely, but it's very nicely written. I think it's my brain. I certainly understand it's about data fatigue in communities. So let me just focus on that. I mean, I would love to see, I think there is probably an elephant in the room where communities, I don't know if anyone's measured it, but I feel like communities must feel that they are over-researched. I feel that when we talk about outcomes, we're talking about real big social change, although project change also. I imagine that in the future, some greater degree of collaborative, whole of society, outcome, impact level data collection could be done. How we could ever convince donors and implementing partners, the bigger ones, to do it, to relieve the burden on community members, I'm not quite sure. But I think that's the first answer. Look at collaborative efforts. I also think, I mean, the other things we could do about data fatigue include having some form of norms around questionnaire length. You know, Volker mentioned before this idea of a TripAdvisor or aid advisor. I'd love to hear people's reaction to it, but you know, I feel that maybe just a single click, like when you're buying something from Amazon or feeding back on your Uber driver, you know, I think it's not impossible. There's a future which beneficiaries just rate it, and the back end of data systems provides the cross-tabulation, the cross-cutting analysis. But I would love to hear if the person who asked the question would like to help my brain, and I think I'm not answering exactly the right question. Over.
I think, I mean, from my understanding of the question is how to address data fatigue, right? If the person who asks this wants to intervene, but I think you gave useful insights into this. Yeah, if anyone has any follow-up, otherwise maybe
Yes, I can add one point, because when we talk about third-party monitoring, we talk about three types of monitoring. The first one, internal. Most organizations, they have their internal monitoring and evaluation systems, and they have external. Sometimes the same organization sometimes commissions others to monitor their activities. So this is a second layer, we can say. And then a third-party monitoring when it is commissioned by donors or by the international partners, for instance. And usually, to avoid this fatigue, usually we ask the implementing partners to share with us list of those who were interviewed internally and those who were interviewed in case they commissioned any external monitoring company, and then we exclude them from the from data collection. Otherwise, if they are asked by three companies, or internal, the first one internal, and then the external one, and the third-party monitoring, it is really very annoying for communities and beneficiaries. This is how we avoid this point with some organizations as a third-party monitoring company. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I will raise the other question that was raised, and anyone else who would like to pose questions, I remind you that you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I will keep track of the queue, and you can also unmute yourself. Someone asked you, maybe this would be interesting to hear an answer from Youssef, as you have experience in kind of like not non-profit organization, or for Volker as a kind of the other side of it. It was asked if it is okay to ask for-profit local organizations to do TPM for non-profit organizations. So I guess the question refers to kind of possible conflict of interest or kind of possible issues that rise from these different types of organization working for and with each other.
Yeah, if it is related to conflict of interest, this is a very interesting point, because sometimes you have, as a company, you have contracts directly with some organizations that they will be monitored by a third-party monitoring party, and we need to be clear. As a trust consultancy, we collaborate with some organizations together. We submit sometimes third-party monitoring proposals together, but in a condition that there is no conflict of interest, and sometimes also in case we monitor this directly, this organizations, we don't accept third-party monitoring company. This is why when we apply for third-party monitoring assignments, we ask donors or international NGOs about their local partners. Then we check if we have any contracts with them, or we submitted any proposals to monitor or evaluate their activities to avoid this conflict of interest. Otherwise, in case there's no conflict of interest, this is fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other speaker would like to follow up, or? I think. Yeah, sure. Volker.
Yeah, I wanted the data fatigue is quite a passion of mine. I feel as an organization, and we can of course blame the donors and the requirements, but I would also say that inefficiencies would also drive us often to collect more data than we should. And that of course translates then into any third-party monitoring arrangement, because at the end of the day, we do say what data we need. It doesn't really matter at the end then who collects it. So whether it's our staff or a third-party group of people, it is really going on a data diet, so to speak, is really important, because we do so often because we have different projects or different grants from different donors that do very similar things in the same communities often, and then we may well ask the same people very similar questions in very high frequency, and that's not okay. We're taking people's time, we're taking people's emotional space often, because it can be stressful that you get asked all the time. It's and I feel there is just not enough yet of a consciousness collectively in our field that we should really minimize this, and we should really make sure that we only ask the questions that we really need to ask, so maybe use less indicators, and as much as possible collaborate. If someone has already asked almost the same question, can we not share the data? So there's a long way to go to become a lot more collaborative and efficient in regard to that. I just want to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think this tied nicely the conversation about like requiring too much data and too much time out of people, which is a problem that rises a bit in these empowerment programs for communities, I guess. Relating to the second question, Mohammed in the chat maybe raised a point that is interesting in terms of accountability as like a central mechanism within these dynamics. If you would like to talk, you can also unmute yourself. But yeah, otherwise it's okay. We also are kind of out of time. So if there's any final pressing questions, you can raise them now. Otherwise, we thanks so much, the speakers who've gotten time out of your busy schedules. It was super interesting. We only have kind of 1 minute left, so yeah. If any final comment wants to be made also by the public, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, Volker, did you want to say anything? Sorry, maybe I interrupted you.
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just saw you're on mute. Great. Then thank you so much. I think everyone really appreciated this conversation, and I think it was a lot to take in and a lot to food for thought. We will kind of share in the follow-up email information that we have discussed today, and we really hope this was useful for everyone who attended it. Thank you again, everyone, for making it.
Guys, all the best.
Thank you. All the best for your work.
Thank
Yes.
you. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.